Um, I'm very excited to be here, and also I want to recognize I think the first thing I want to recognize is the fact that we are here sharing this subject on a shared land. So, and on this land that we studied, worked, proved ourselves, raised families, and thrived. So that's in itself, to me, it's the benefit of treaties, even for newcomers. And we will get into that when we talk about the role of newcomers towards treaties, but also reconciliation and building relationships with Indigenous communities here in Manitoba. We will get into that, but I wanted to acknowledge that we are on shared land, but I want to take the time and talk about what does that actually mean from both perspectives, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. And when I say non-Indigenous, that would include newcomers. The term newcomer is really kind of a tricky one. Some people say, well, a newcomer is someone who just arrived. And some people may say, oh, maybe the people who are seeking protection, such as refugees or refugee claimants, or former refugees. And some people say everyone who technically new to this country, speak with an accent, and look a little different than the rest of the people. So I have gathered all this information through my encounter with people in different settings, but I think in newcomers, my understanding, and I checked even on that, when we talk about treaties or we talk about relationships or the connection between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities in Canada, I think the proper way to understand the term newcomer is everyone else but Indigenous or newcomers. And I think I tend, or at least I lean towards this definition or understanding of what newcomer is. Everyone but Indigenous person, or communities, or peoples. And so whether you came yesterday or you came 200 years ago, technically you're a newcomer. Now, of course, within each group and every demographic, you would find subgroups, you find layers of differences, and so on and so forth. But the bottom line is, you have Indigenous, non-Indigenous considered in this context newcomers. For the newcomers, there are really newcomers, like myself and others, and there is really the newest of the new, who just arrived and probably struggle with their basic needs, such as language, getting reestablished or resettled in Winnipeg. So there's so many layers, and the reason I started with that is just so we keep that in mind, the dynamic in terms of relationship building, in terms of expectations tied to relationship buildings, and the expectations tied to reconciliation and a role, or take an active role in reconciliation when it comes to newcomers. It is really hard to talk to newcomers and tell them, let's talk about reconciliation. Or what do you do when it comes to reconciliation? I think the basic answer with them, they say, what are you talking about? What is reconciliation to start with? And I think that's just a very fair question. Lots of people, whether they're newcomers in terms of our understanding to newcomers, as I just introduced it, the newcomers who just arrived to this country and trying to reestablish themselves, they struggle with that. But also the people who are oldcomer/newcomer, based on my introduction, they still struggle when it comes to action taken in relation to reconciliation, relationship buildings, community engagement, and so on and so forth. So I think there are lots of pieces and lots of layers to break down to digestible pieces so we can make sense when we talk about treaties and newcomers. So there is an interesting part while I was looking at treaties from a newcomer perspective. And this newcomer perspective is shared understanding of treaties by let's call them the newcomer, the first newcomer, and then I will call the latest arrivals, let's say people who just arrived, like me and others who not born in Manitoba, let's call them newcomer type 2, just for the sake of clarification. So I am type 2, type 1 is the people who've been here for 300 years, or whatever. So type 2 people, there are basic needs surrounding their existence here. And when you talk to them about subjects like reconciliation, let's build relationships, and so on and so forth, the first impression that you would get, they're curious. They become curious about it, and it's positive. But also, it signals to us that those people are actually still trying to figure their lives here, figure their lives out in Manitoba. How do they register their children in schools? What type of housing they can get? What type of job that they can put their hands on? What type of education credentials that need to be recognized so they can get their professions? All of these type of challenges. Despite all of these challenges, when you ask them about treaties or reconciliation, they become curious in a positive way. And to me, that's why I feel very encouraged to pursue this type of work, to engage further and in depth in building relationship with Indigenous communities. When Indigenous communities and newcomers, type 2. Type 1, there are also people who want to understand and learn about it. Because the assumption from type 2 that the type 1 know what's going on. And the reality is they don't know much about what type 2 didn't know about. And I think so there's a triangle if I can create that image. People call settlers and whatever, I call it type 1, type 2, and then Indigenous. If you want to create a healthy triangle, I think that dialogue about treaties and around treaties have to have that triangle, the three of us. Type 1, type 2, and Indigenous. A reason for that is because we live in one nation, one society. You cannot segregate or dissect the society into convenient parts that make sense to you or to me. It has to make sense to a nationwide type of subject. And in this case, we have treaties. And we'll get into the terms of treaties, what it means, and why newcomers have to type 2. Why do the newcomers type 2 have to care about treaties? Why? I just arrived here. I had nothing to do with the history of wrongdoings. My ancestors weren't here. So why the heck you talk to me about treaties and reconciliation? This is a subject that I have nothing to do with. And the answer is to that is maybe we need to break down treaties, concept of treaties, and then we get to reconciliation. So I think I purposely chose two perspectives, Indigenous perspective of treaties and non-Indigenous perspective. And non-Indigenous would include the latest waves of arrivals and immigration, including myself and others who consider themselves as newcomers. I will start with the non-Indigenous. So historically viewed treaties as legal contracts. And probably if you talk to lots of newcomers, regardless of what types, they would share that understanding. When you tell them treaties, they will say, well, it is viewed treaties as legal contracts aimed at securing land for settlement and resources use. Really, that's what comes to mind. When you hear the word contract and then use and then resources, land, property, that type of thing comes to mind. Many people, the newcomers in this case, have had limited knowledge of treaties or assumed that they only apply to Indigenous peoples. And that's, I think, I witnessed that. When you talk to newcomers, many of them, when you talk about treaties, it's automatically the notion of this is something related to Indigenous people. It's not mine. So that's two. Now is the understanding is how you view treaties, what it is as a contract, and then it's not mine, that's two things. And then there's someone like me comes to them and say, but it is shared responsibilities. So you can see how confusing that can be to newcomers. And that's why work like this, place like this, is really, I think, it's essential to not only clarify and educate, but also inform and empower people so they are equipped when they're asked not to just provide answers, they are driven to do things based on conviction and understanding and satisfaction. And if you don't have these prior parts put in one line of understanding that is clearly defined, easy to understood, you have high expectations of people. You may not get them delivered those expectations. You may not see them delivered. And that's why I took my time to talk about treaties from a non-Indigenous perspective. Now, if we go to the Indigenous perspective, and I'm not talking on behalf of Indigenous people here, I think there are people here in this room probably know way more than I do about that, but I just want to compare those two world views, because that's essential, especially when we're talking about treaties and reconciliation. So the Indigenous, my understanding of Indigenous, and the Commission SCS can correct me if I'm wrong, Indigenous perspectives are sacred living agreements, that's the treaties. Treaties are sacred living agreements meant to last as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. Serious difference between the first one that you heard and this one. Very vastly different point of view. They represent nation-to-nation relationships. Oh, so there's nation to nation. So that means Indigenous and us, the rest of Canada, including newcomers, whatever types you want to choose. Okay, so that's two. Many Indigenous people believe the spirit and intent of treaties has not been fully honored by governments. Okay, so that's another layer to deal with. And treaties were meant to ensure coexistence, not surrender of land or rights. Very different point of views, very different world views. First one is property, resource use. This is completely different. Newcomers, I can't speak on behalf of all newcomers, but my understanding is this. Probably, depending on how much you spend time with the newcomers, explaining or talking or exposing them to certain facts from the right source, they may join. If you tell them treaties, probably their minds would go to contracts. When you say treaty, it sounds as if it is an agreement between two parties or more, but it's agreement on over something. And when you say land, probably people would go, oh, looks like someone sold land or exchanged something and all of that. That's what comes to mind. I'm just giving you practical answers from tangible, lived experiences, or at least tested experiences that I went through in my work, also in my social encounters. And I think that's the best, probably I would say, testimonies that I can share with you based on real encounter. And that's what I'm sharing with you. I'm sharing with you that understanding coming from newcomers. So where we're going with that is, one is, I think, understanding treaties from both worldviews, the way we just did. And then survey people's understanding, especially newcomers in this case, of what they understand of treaties. And then we move on with educating and engaging, relationship building, and then active role in reconciliation. To see there's lots of work needed. But I think a place like this is playing the role of educating people, offering them platform and understanding of what treaties is all about. And people like us try to play our roles in terms of understanding information from the right source and taking them into the rest of the people, in this case the newcomer population in Manitoba. So maybe it is worth not to use the mic. So maybe it's worth sharing a real example of what we have done in relation to both treaties and reconciliation. So from newcomer perspective, I'll give you a recent example, and by recent it's probably 10 years old or so. Example. We have noticed in Winnipeg that there's a little bit of friction / I would say misunderstanding, and also misinformed stance that newcomers had towards Indigenous people. But we didn't understand, and when I say newcomers, not all newcomers, but the newcomers that we came across or we came in contact with, there were many. When we noticed that there is a little bit of a gap in their understanding of what Indigenous peoples are, and what treaties are, and what reconciliation is all about, all of these things, we weren't talking about these terms, reconciliation, treaties. We were talking about basic needs: housing, education, employment, shared neighborhood, all of that. We noticed from these conversations that the newcomers, they already had made their minds about Indigenous people. And then it got to the level where it became concern. It became very concerned. Why? Because you cannot do your job or deliver on your role, whether you're a frontline worker working with the newcomers, or you're an organization that you want to serve newcomers, and you have a specific mandate, let's say housing. It becomes really difficult for you to do the job because of, if a newcomer is saying, I don't want to share this space because of the information I was given. I don't want to go to this neighborhood, for example. Why? Because they don't say, at that time they didn't say Indigenous. They say native. Say, I don't want to go where the natives are. I'm just giving you a realistic example that I went through, I witnessed. So this is not I read in books or Googled or whatever the case may be. I lived those experiences. So when these examples kept piling up, we thought we need to do something about this. What's going on? Is this just specific pockets that exist in our communities, or this is a concerning phenomenon that spreading and becoming challenging? So we did the research, and the research that we did confirmed our concerns that there are some problems here, but also there is lots of hope. And the hope is that newcomers are very curious when you give them half an hour of your time. You don't need much. You just open the subject. Give them space. Newcomers would interact. They will find commonalities. They will find connections. And through those connections, you build relationships. And through those relationships, you build empathy, and the empathy would lead to action. And the action would produce relationships, healthy relationships. And we have lots of examples. I'll give you a good example came out of this work that I mentioned. Of course, there are lots of details in between, but we don't have the time to go through all of that. The other example is, I was lucky enough to introduce one Indigenous person to a newcomer population in Manitoba. One. That person, that individual, engaged. I don't want to mention a number because I might be off here, but I would say maybe roughly around 15 organizations that work with newcomers, but around 700 to close to 1,000 people of the newcomers attended one Indigenous event, not just in a folkloric curiosity that's just going just to see dancing. No, prior knowledge and understanding and establishing
establishing a place where they can ask questions and all of that. And the people who brought them to those events, they were well informed because there's a prior work happening. It's different from, you know, when you walk in and you go, oh, what is this group of people dancing? What did they call them again? That's different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking prior work done, established before this individual engaged this big number of people.
That's one Indigenous person. And engage this many people. And more. This year is going to be even bigger. But it took lots of background work, lots of work in the background, lots of work. And before the work happened, big piece called trust had to be there.
Role of a newcomer. So as I said, why would a newcomer even care? Look, some people say I just arrived from war, conflict, and all of that. I barely know how to say 2 or 3 words in English. Why would I care about this? I had nothing to do with it. You talking to me? I think we were able to explain to newcomers after we explained to them what treaty means, reconciliation. Why do we have reconciliation? We went over the history and all that, and our information came from the proper source, and that is Indigenous source. We were able to engage people. They were able to see that we are all the beneficiary of treaties. You have your family raised in this as a result of treaties, and we made the connections clear. You benefiting from being here, establishing a family, going to school, getting a job, and all that. That's called treaty and benefits of treaties. And we were able to explain these things to newcomers. They were more than willing to understand more, and that is an encouraging thing to do for us and for them to keep doing the thing working. Of course, we were able to explain the meaning of reconciliation. Lots of newcomers come also from, I would say, background where in history of colonization, marginalization, and so on and so forth. So some of them, they were faster than others to make the connections and understand clearly what reconciliation is all about. Some others probably they have more questions and curiosity, but one thing in common across the newcomer population, and that is they really do care. They want to know. They want to learn. There's a real interest in learning, and lots of people get shocked. They could not believe. They could not believe that this is actually happening here in Canada. Lots of this is. I'm telling you, in every event that I go to, in every educational platform that we were part of, the newcomers, many of them, they share the same reaction, and that's, I cannot believe it, that this is actually happening. But when it comes from an Indigenous person sharing their experiences, then they would listen with empathy, but also they find connection. So that's really great way to establish a good practical definition of what reconciliation is all about. And then understanding past harms and all of that, supporting Indigenous rights. I think these are the things that, and challenging stereotypes. Lots of stereotypes. And the research that I earlier mentioned resulted into the creation of the toolkit that was mentioned earlier. And the toolkit the purpose behind the toolkit was to challenge misconceptions, stereotypes, and myths. And so I think when we talk about taking actions, some of the people will say, what can I do? It's 300, 200 years of for wrongdoings, and this is history. How can I go and fix things? My answer to them is, we live today. Indigenous people are still here, and they're here, and relationships need to be built. If you don't know how, ask. If you want to learn more, go to the right sources. And there's no shame in not knowing. Lots of people, whether they've been here for 200 or 300 years,
or you just arrived. If you don't
No, it's okay, you don't know. But it is really not okay to stay not engaged or not okay to do anything about it after you know the fact. So I think there's lots to say about those two subjects, but the area of newcomer and Indigenous relationship building, community engagement is very rich. Lots of examples. We have lots of examples, but we also have 60 minutes, so I have to leave some room for people to ask questions. I think I can stop here. Thank you.
I'm curious, is there a place where we can get a look at what the toolkit looks like? Like, I'd be curious to see what kind of questions are asked and what the process is for kind of getting exposed to different information for newcomers. And the reason I think that'd be interesting is because it's something that it sounds like that's used for the newcomers type 2, but is there also a way to take that information and to have that exposure for newcomers like type 1, I guess, in different contexts, whether that's professional training, whether that's just kind of things so that we can generate information for how to have those conversations with people who have lived here for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the toolkit, the short answer is you find it. I think I can connect you to 2 people. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I think you can go to the website of Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. You will find they have link there. Also Manso, probably they have link to that. And the Treaty Innovation Commissions of Manitoba, they played a huge role in supporting this. Actually, they supported in true terms, like in real things, that they did support this project and made it reality.
That's great.
So that there is more than one way to access this information.
One of the Treaty Commission Speakers Bureau members. So I've spoken a number of times to immigrant groups, and they are, as you say, universally really interested in this subject. But one of the things that I've found when I've talked to them is this question of who's welcoming whom here.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of an artifact of treaties that were made between the British Crown and Indigenous people as equals.
Right.
And that was kind of the last moment that Indigenous people were equals in terms of immigration. And so after that, the Crown kind of stepped in front of Indigenous people in the welcoming operation, and the whole process of becoming a Canadian citizen involves an engagement with the Governor General. And I think it is perfect right now that the Governor General is Indigenous. And I think it should always be like that, because the gesture of it being an Indigenous person truly can welcome people based on history. It just helps people think about, like, why are we here? Not just that the treaties exist, but that they exist for a reason, and the reason is that Indigenous people were here first. They are our hosts.
That's true. Very true. Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we introduced also when it comes to immigration is we said we need more Indigenous representation throughout the process from pre-arrival to post-arrival. And obviously that needs some work and needs some time to happen. But I do agree, like, I think at the end of the day, yes, Indigenous people are people of this land. We came, they shared the land with us. We have something we call Canada, and in reality, without them, we would not be able to be here unless like by force. And with us, doesn't work, and we don't want that because it didn't work out, obviously, in history. So we're here, we share the land together, but also that needs to be recognized throughout different sectors and different fields, including immigration.
May I ask, another experience I've had is riding around in a cab with a taxi driver from some other place. And and one of the guys, he said, "Oh, I was really interested to meet Indigenous people." And I had my first time when I gave somebody a $40 ride to the North End, and they stiffed me and wouldn't pay. And I just thought, oh crap, that is a real experience. And somehow or other, the experience of immigrants is enter Manitoba society at a point where they would meet a lot of Indigenous people who are having difficulties. They are not living their best life, and so they form their stereotypes in that moment, and it's very hard to get past that real experience. I just wondered whether your experience dealing with people has helped with that.
So I think one thing is I always, when people ask me, whether it's in a meeting like this or places like that, or just having a conversation on the street, I always say we have to be real in terms of assessing what's going on, like to call it the way it is. So yes, there are problems in the North End. Yes, there are problems on Main Street. Yes, there are people who you can't talk with because they are intoxicated and they are on drugs and all of that. These are facts on the ground. The question is, what do you want to do about it and why this is happening? And so, of course, if you send a newcomer to someone like that, they would have a very different impression than, let's say, sending them to a place like here. They're both Indigenous. It's a friend of mine who's Indigenous. He's saying, how many Indigenous people live in the city? And I don't know, the answer was 100-something,000. He said, how many of them on Main Street? So they say 3,000. So what are the rest? And people don't see that, right? Also, they're working and have families and doing all of it, but you don't see that. What you see people on the Main Street. So of course the newcomers, guess what? Where did they come? Newcomers. And I'm talking about newcomers who are not economic immigrants, like people, refugees and others. They come, they're sponsored, they come, they end up in downtown. What did they see? These images that we're talking about. So the impression that they get, the opinion that they form based on what they see. And they're right. I had another story, long story, but maybe a different time, and I'm thinking we tested the knowledge of the newcomers by integrating them into a real life scenario, like where they come into contact with Indigenous people. Basically taking them from a place of not knowing anything to integrate them into the experience. It's like, what did they call that movie, documentary, I forgot, that was produced. Is it First Contact? I think First Contact. Similar to that. And the experience was in a matter of 24 hours, not even 24 hours. Their opinions and perspective shifted dramatically. I was involved in this social experiment from ill-informed opinions and stereotypes to very large empathy towards Indigenous people, but also they wanted to learn more and that they felt sorry that they had what they had in information. And it's just a very short period of time. I think people largely decent. They are decent if you offer them the opportunity to learn, but learn from the source and by being factual. And sometimes we want to show, like we want to make things look better. So by saying things, we don't want to talk about, so we don't want to hurt people. So no, we say facts the way they are, but the question is, to me, is why those facts exist in the first place? I think that's where the energy should be directed at. And instead of us trying to put makeup on things, sugarcoat it, it just doesn't work that way. Because people, if you tell a newcomer, no, feel good. If you go to, don't harbor those stereotypes. Go to Main Street, you will be all good. No, this person would not be in good shape. They maybe get pushed around or something happened to them. Then what? You tell them the truth, but also tell them why this fact exists. Then you're giving them something to take home. And that's where they can become, they have empathy with real understanding, not empathy based on, I think maybe a false, I would say false premises and creating a context that doesn't exist. So I agree with you. And thus the taxi drivers and all of the different newcomers, professionals working in different fields and all that, some of them don't have they don't know, they never had the exposure to understand and learn. They don't know. They really don't. All what they do is they see an individual sitting in their car as a taxi driver, and they have limited information, and when you have half knowledge, it's very dangerous. And when you have crook, non-aligned with any logic type of opinion, it creates problems. And so you have an individual reinforce that opinion when you see the behavior and see the interaction of it. So I think having factual information and brave dialogue would break barriers in terms of stereotypes and misconceptions and so on and so forth. So in my sharing circles, I always tell people, if you have an opinion, even if it's negative, share it. Share it. Why? So we can talk about it. Like going to therapy. If you pay a therapist to listen to you, and you're trying to present the best version of yourself, well, why the heck are you spending your money? You're wasting time. Be real. So that's, and I think we need therapy when it comes to reconciliation. We need therapy when it comes to treaties. We need therapy, and therapy is on the nationwide type scale. Yeah. I hope that's kind of sufficient.
I have a bit of a follow-up question, I think, to what Jeremy's asking as well. So a couple of times you've said that there's this kind of they told me that it'll be violent, or they told me this. And so I'm just curious, is the person who's giving them that information also now providing the balance, being like, if this is what you've heard, it's for these reasons, but here's some information in some places where you can go to see the counterbalance, like listing off this place. So is that information also being provided now?
So that's a good question. So first, maybe we'll start with the they. They means probably their relatives or friend that they came a month before them, or maybe a person that's been here for a year or so.
Okay.
In addition to some people that probably well established from here, also so during whatever talk or whatever indirect talk, but mainly people that they know, because they go to the people that, when I say they, I mean newcomers that just arrived. They go to their relatives or friends who arrived before them, and they had similar experiences. What you're talking about is maybe if you can balance this out by sending them to places like, let's say, the center or other organizations where they can get educated or learn. We didn't have that privilege before. We didn't have that. Now we do, but I don't know how active some organizations and people that work with the newcomers to refer them here. And also, it's mandates plays a huge role of those organizations. Tell me I provide specific services, not including that. So to take a step further, it's really left for the, I would say, organizational sense-making steps, or individual. And that's why I think the best reconciliation is when people take actions like that, the one you just suggested, whether you're an organization or an individual, is to do something about that. So being factual, yes, these exist, but guess what? I think we can learn about what's going on here by going to 1, 2, 3 places and maybe invite people, let's say on the center here or other places where they can educate people, maybe give them a little bit of exposure. And as I said earlier, when newcomers are given or provided with solid factual information, like any other people, and you tell them this is the history, this is what happened, and that's what drove things to be the way they are now. They become not only empathic, but they become curious to know further, and they want to do something about it. My experience is 99% of the newcomers that I come across, they want to do something, but they want to know how. They ask you, what do you want me to do? And so we break it down into some actionable things. Like, come in here, strike a conversation, ask some curious questions. You're in your school, ask about Indigenous subject. If you're in the work field and you don't see any Indigenous co-workers and all that, ask what the heck is going on. Why don't you have that? Stuff like that. That's what brings real life scenarios back to our community. Yeah. Okay.
I thought there was a question.
Any other last questions for Hani before we conclude? Do appreciate it, Hani. Thank you for your presentation today. Thank you for all those who attended here. nice cold December day. Look out on our social media for other lunch and learn series that we have throughout the month. Our website as well, trcm.ca. And again, thank you for coming.
You're welcome. Thank you. I wish everyone pleasant season and holidays and whatever holidays you celebrate, whether that's Christmas or whatever, New Year, all of it. But I really do want to say the last thing is I think maybe we need to have we don't want to have to complicate things when we want to talk about this type of subject. Maybe we need to bring it to conversational level. We just have conversation, but we need to expand on this conversation. We need to, when I came here and I talked about treaties, I didn't talk about it from a legal perspective or expert, but I came just sharing those lived experiences, tested encounters and so on and so forth, because I think that's what makes us interested in being good, active members in our communities, using our humanity. That's all. That's all. And so I would say more conversations, as simple as this that we have in here, and more of it needed, but ongoing. And not to assume that Type 1 knows everything. Type 1 and Type 2 both on the same boat, but the Type 1 have I would say, the privilege of being established, well established. The newcomer, they did not have the same chance. That's all.